All right, in this video on supply chain management, we're going to talk about managing the supply chain. So we're going to talk about some of the issues with managing the supply chain and some of the opportunities that are out there as well. In one of our last couple of videos, we've talked about some of the risks in managing the supply chain. We've talked about some of the ethical issues with the supply chain. And in this video, we're going to primarily focus on, if you're a supply chain professional, what do you actually do, right? Whether it's logistics management, negotiations, managing inventory. So we're going to spend a lot of time in this video talking about what people who are professional supply chain managers, what the day-to-day function of what they can do looks like. And so before we even get there, let's talk about some of the issues in the supply chain, and then we'll talk about some of the opportunities that are out there as well. So the very first issue we're going to talk about with the supply chain is the bullwhip effect. Okay, the bullwhip effect. And when you look at some of the things that make the bullwhip effect happen, it's local optimization, sales incentives, and large lots. Okay, so these three issues complicate the development of an efficient integrated supply chain. So local optimization is when, whether it's a buyer for a facility, whether that be a retailer or a distributor, or even the wholesaler, when they don't look at the big picture and they're only focused on just their facility, that's local optimization. Focusing on local profit, local cost, or local inventory levels based on limited knowledge. Incentives are when facilities go and buy more products than they need because they want to get a quantity discount model, or buy 3, get 1 free, whatever it may be. You're essentially just buying more than you need because of sales incentives. So you're probably getting a discount to buy more. The third is large lots. This is when production managers want to build more than is actually needed because they get efficiency by creating a large lot. Or let's say you've calculated out your economic order quantity and it's 250 units, but the distributor only sells them in lots of 1,000 or 2,000. Well, then you're going to have to buy more than you wanted because that's the lot size that is offered. So when you take these three issues and you put them together, plus many others that are out there, this creates the bullwhip effect. So the bullwhip effect is the increasing fluctuations in orders that move through the supply chain. The tendency is for larger order size fluctuations as they're relayed through the supply chain, and it creates that whip, right? So when you have a whip, it starts off small and then it goes bigger and bigger towards the end of the whip. That's why it's called the bullwhip effect. It fluctuates throughout the supply chain. This creates unstable production schedules, expensive capacity change costs, longer lead times, and obsolescence. The damage can be minimized with supplier coordination and planning. So I'm going to give an example here on the next slide of what the bullwhip effect looks like. And what you'll be able to see pretty easily is, well, Brent, with supplier collaboration, communication, good forecasting, that can all be prevented. And in many cases, it could. But as we've seen over the course of the last couple of years, our supply chains are complex. Not all parties talk to each other. And there is this trickle-down effect to where people and organizations are reactionary. So this all tends to create the bullwhip effect. So the bullwhip effect, you can see that in this example, the consumer has a short-term increase in consumer demand. So let's just use the Super Bowl as an example. Let's just say I'm having a Super Bowl party at my house. So I go out and I buy more Lay's potato chips than I normally would. Let's say I normally buy, a pack a week. Well, I'm having a Super Bowl party at my house, so I go out and buy 30 packs of Lay's potato chips for all the people that are coming over. So I'm the consumer. There's a small blip in demand and spending because I'm going to go and get the products that I need to support this Super Bowl party. Well, then the retailer. I go to Vons. That's who I've got out here. So I go to Vons and I buy these 30 packs of Lay's potato chips, and so does my neighbor. And so does my other neighbor. And they all go out and they buy potato chips as well. And if I'm the buyer at Vons, all of a sudden I see that these Lay's potato sticks are flying off the shelf. And maybe I'm not a sports fan, right? So I don't know, oh my goodness, the Super Bowl is coming up in a couple weeks, and that's why everyone's buying hot dogs and beer and potato chips. all he sees or she sees is this spike in demand, this temporary spike in demand. And because he's only looking locally, he's got limited knowledge, he doesn't realize that there's a reason for this spike in demand. So, in order to not fall behind, he then creates an order with the wholesaler or the distributor for an even larger order. Now, mind you, I'm going to my local Vons to buy those potato chips, but so is everyone else in the city. So maybe you went to Trader Joe's, and maybe another person listening to this lecture recording went to Safeway. And so maybe some of those buyers at those retailers weren't sports fans either, and they're just looking at the analytics and they're looking at supply and demand and they're seeing that their orders went up, so they all go do the same thing. So the local buyer at my Vons and the local buyer at your Trader Joe's, they all go place larger orders with the wholesalers because they don't want to run out. So then the wholesaler, they're getting all of these orders coming in that are all a little bit higher than usual. And so they're thinking, whoa, I'm a distributor. My whole job is to have products on the shelves when the retailers come to buy from me. I'm not going to run out, so I'm going to go buy more. So they go and buy an even larger order from the manufacturer or the final supplier. They're going to create an order even larger, and this manufacturer, if they don't have a good forecasting tool or they don't know that the Super Bowl was coming up, then they would create more than they needed as well. So this bullwhip effect is essentially just an overreaction at every step in that supply chain, and everyone orders more than they should, creating that bullwhip effect. Now, it goes both ways. The example I gave was if demand is going up, everyone over-ordered. It can happen exactly the same in the opposite direction as well. When we were all quarantined a couple years ago for a month or so, people just stopped buying things, right? So if retailers, wholesalers, and manufacturers overreacted to that, which many of them did, and they didn't keep production levels where they were because they cut too much, you can have the bullwhip effect go in the opposite direction as well, and then you start seeing a lot of shortages versus excess inventory. So this is the bullwhip effect. And again, most everyone between the manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, they all know when they need to stock up for the Super Bowl and the World Series and New Year's Eve. So now we've got enough seasonal forecasting tools to not let that happen. But the bullwhip effect is alive and it's real, and it happens, especially in these complex supply chains where not everyone is talking to each other. So now let's move on to opportunities in managing the integrated supply chain. And the book highlights 7 different opportunities for managing the supply chain. We're not going to go into all of them. You can read the textbook. It's about 2 pages long on the various opportunities that are there. But I did want to highlight when you're in supply chain, there is roles specifically for reducing your purchasing costs, whether you're in strategic sourcing or global sourcing. You're going to go out there and you're going to be creating RFPs and doing win-win contracting and things like that. So you really want to work on reducing your costs. One of the things you do in supply chain management is there's various tricks and tools that we're going to learn in the chapter on inventory management on how to effectively manage your inventory, whether using economic order quantities, economic production quantities, Kanbans, vendor-managed inventory, just-in-time, blanket purchase orders. These are all different tricks that you use in supply chain to help manage the inventory so that you're getting exactly what you need when you need it in the right quantities that you need to help reduce your inventory and improve your inventory turns while always having the products that you need. So there are lots of different things you can do in inventory management to really help improve your supply chain. I was constantly, when I was in manufacturing, looking for ways to reduce lead times. So if I was purchasing something that had a 12-week lead time, I could find a different source that had the same exact product at a comparable cost, and maybe they were a 6-week lead time or an 8-week lead time. We were constantly looking for ways to improve lead times because then we could have a faster, more responsive organization with shorter lead times to our end customers, and that was important to us. We were building custom products. So it took us anywhere from 3 to 4 months upon placement of an order to get it into our customers' hands. And so if we could shorten that lead time, it would give us a competitive advantage. And in supply chain, you're front and center in helping to reduce that overall lead time. So in supply chain, you've got just your hands in a little bit of everything, whether it's the purchasing price, inventory management, quality and service, turnaround time, product standardization. In supply chain, there are all these various opportunities that you've got to help make organizational improvements. So now let's talk about how we build and develop the supplier base. So when you're in supply chain, part of your job is picking the vendors that you will be using, whether they're manufacturers or distributors. It's kind of irrelevant, but you are responsible for where you're going to be buying those goods. So when you're purchasing items from an outside vendor, you have to pick the right ones. And so there's a process for doing that. There's supplier qualification, where you're narrowing it down. You're picking vendors that only meet your specific criteria for cost, quality, turnaround time, vendors that have a good track record of high quality and good customer service. And so you're going to try and narrow down how many vendors you're picking from, because there's a lot to pick from. And then you will, after you select those vendors, many times you'll certify them. So you'll educate them, you'll work with them, you'll say, here's exactly what my organization expects. And you can label them, whether they're a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supplier to your organization. So there's lots of different things that you can do managing those vendors, making sure that you're picking the right ones, and then moving them along in their continuous process improvement to make sure that they are delivering high quality goods and services to you. So a big part of that is supplier development. That's when you're integrating your suppliers into your system. After you've picked them, you want them to be amazing suppliers to you. So it's kind of like when you've got employees. You want your employees to be awesome. Well, when you're in supply chain, you want your vendors to be awesome. So you're going to help them along in that journey of improving their quality, improving their service, improving that turnaround time, and reducing those costs. You're going to collaborate with them as much as you can to help make them be able to support you. So you do that through working with quality requirements, product specifications, providing them with good forecasts and delivery schedules, and also scorecards and auditing them. So like we talked about in Chapter 2, where we did the Rating Outsource Providers, one of the things which we'll go over here in just a second again is after you've qualified your suppliers and selected which ones to use, you can also use various tools for managing them with scorecards as well. So a key part of supply chain management is building and developing your supplier base. You're only as good as the suppliers that deliver to you, so you want to make sure that you pick really good ones, you help develop them, and then you can find win-win solutions to make your supply chain best in class. So one of the easy tools that we've talked about already in Chapter 2, so I won't belabor the point here, is managing your suppliers through the use of an effective scorecard after you've helped pick which supplier you want to use. So just using a best weighted score, whether it's called the Rating Outsource Providers or you're using a Supplier Report Card, the math is essentially the same. You're just going to give different criteria, different weights, and then you're going to score your suppliers, and then you can give them a report card going forward, and you're going to manage and develop that supplier to help them improve their performance to your organization. So here's just another clip again of the Rating Outsource Providers, but again, you can use it for supplier report cards as well. All right, a very large part of supply chain is the strategic sourcing function and just flat out negotiating with suppliers. I spent the first 15 years or so of my career in a manufacturing setting where I worked on inventory management, MRP, forecasting, global sourcing, overseeing our supplier quality engineers. Then when I made the transition over to healthcare, almost all that I do now is negotiating with vendors on behalf of our clients to help make sure that they're picking the right vendors, the right products, and they're getting the right price. So that's a big part of what I do in my current function for my current employer. So negotiations are a significant element in purchasing, and it requires a unique skill set and training. There's lots of different classes out there that just help you to be a better negotiator. There's three main negotiation tactics that are out there. There's the cost-based pricing model, there's the market-based pricing model, and then there's the competitive bidding model. So cost-based pricing models, what that is when a supplier will open up their books to you. If you've got a long-term relationship with them or some kind of year-over-year agreement, you can say, I'm willing to pay you 10% over your costs. So you're going to make a 10% profit. So if they believe that their with their raw materials and their labor and their overhead that it costs them $1 to make a product, then you're willing to pay them $1.10. That's a cost-based pricing model if you picked a 10% markup. If their costs go up to $1.10, then you'd pay them 10% on top of that, and I think that's $1.21. So if their costs go up, your costs go up. If their costs go down, your costs would go down. And the reason why this model is great is because you would then collaborate with your vendor to try and mutually find ways to bring down that cost. Because it's a win for them to bring down their costs, and it's a win for you to bring down your costs. So a cost-based pricing model is great when you can get vendors that will agree to it. Market-based price models are based on published pricing, auctions, or indexes. In every industry that I've worked in, manufacturing and now healthcare, I don't like market-based pricing models because I feel that I can do better than the market. The healthcare purchasing index goes up like 5 to 10% every year, but yet my organization, we're helping our clients to reduce costs by 5 or 10% per year, 5 to 10% per year. So I would never agree to a market-based price that goes up. But it's really beneficial for commodities. So if you're in an industry that is heavily tied to petroleum consumption or some of the other market-based commodity pricing, you will want to be tied to that consumer price index or some other indexed price, because as that price goes down, so will yours. But if prices go up, so will yours. So sometimes market-based pricing makes sense. The last and most common out of all of these is competitive bidding. This is where you just ask vendors for, give me a price. What are you going to charge me for this service? What are you going to charge me for this product? It's very common. If you're out there beating up your vendors every time you want to create an order, that generally doesn't foster long-term relationships. But you can still have competitive bids and have a good relationship with that vendor, assuming that you're awarding long-term contracts and really working with them to be a good partner in that supply chain relationship. So that's a lot of the time done through the contracting piece, where you're looking at the risks, the benefits, the fine print, all those various terms and conditions like termination for convenience, liability, the term, which is how long that contract is for. So whether it's a 1-year deal or a 3-year deal or a 10-year deal, that's all done as part of the competitive bidding and the contracting process. So again, this is where I spend a lot of time currently with my current role. Do a lot of competitive bidding, a lot of negotiations, and a lot of contracting, which isn't very fun because, I'm sifting through 30-page agreements, reading that fine print and trying to stay awake. But contracting is part of the job in strategic sourcing because price is only one aspect of a contract. You have to make sure that everything works for you, all that fine print too. Centralized purchasing, the book talks about centralized purchasing, and I'm just going to explain what it is real quick. It's when you've got an organization that has lots of different facilities or business units, and centralized purchasing is when you take all of those purchases and you aggregate them, or you do them at a corporate office. Okay, so an example of that would be one of the health systems that we work with. They've got over 100 different hospitals. And what they do is at the corporate level, they are the ones who do the strategic sourcing because they aggregate the volumes and the utilization for their 100 different facilities. So they do the strategic sourcing at the corporate level, which is centralized purchasing. Sometimes they'll even be the ones who are placing the orders, and then it funnels out to those 100 different facilities. So that's an example of centralized purchasing when you've got a corporate office that is doing all the strategic sourcing and the buying at that central location, not at a facility location. Okay, the last major piece of supply chain management is logistics management. Logistics management is a career in itself. But the objective of logistics management is to obtain efficient operations through the integration of all material acquisition, movement, and storage activities. Okay, logistics management is a big part of supply chain management, whether you are just paying for freight or whether you are managing that whole end-to-end supply chain. You need to understand the various aspects of logistics and how products move from A to B. Literally just the movement from A to B is a complex part of that supply chain. And just using all the issues that I brought up earlier of the Port of Long Beach, how they've had union strikes, how they've had the bottleneck of those carriers that are out in the ocean, or whether it's a natural catastrophe that's creating issues throughout the supply chain and the movement of materials. Logistics management is a big part of that supply chain. So there's a couple key parts of logistics management. Waterway is when you're moving cargo shipments by containers and you're going generally over the ocean, right? So when we think of waterway shipments, we generally think of shipments coming from Europe or China over to America. They come on those big old freighters, and they are moving the standardized containers from that ship, which many times would then go onto a truck. Okay, so trucking is that next piece of logistics management. It moves the majority of our manufactured goods. It offers nice flexibility. And so after something comes off of the boat, they will take a crane and they will put it on the back of a truck, and that truck moves it to its next destination, which can either be a warehouse or a distribution center, or maybe the end customer. Trucking is great because it's very flexible, and it can get you right from that port to its final end location. One thing I didn't mention about waterways, but it's also the same for railroads and air freight, is that there's not a lot of flexibility. So when a boat leaves from Shanghai to Long Beach, it's not going to go somewhere else. So if your products are on that boat and you need them sooner, too bad. So sad. You're going to have to wait. That thing's going from Shanghai to Long Beach, and it's going on the slow boat. Okay? So railroads are the same way. If that container gets on a train and it's going from Boston to San Diego, it's not making any stops for you. So once it gets on that train, it's going to its final location, and there's very infrequently will they make deviations in that. And air freight's exactly the same way. So air freight's going to go from wherever it's taking off to wherever its end location is, and there's not going to be any deviations, so there's not a whole lot of flexibility there. So going back to some of these different methods of logistics, railroads, they're capable of carrying large loads, but again, not very flexible. They are relatively inexpensive, so they're a nice way to move bulk. Air freight is fast and flexible for light loads, but it's generally the most expensive method of shipping. So when I used to buy products overseas, we would always anticipate that we were going to ship something by boat. If we had to ship it by air, all of the cost savings that we planned on were gone. Okay, so you absolutely have to plan on the lead time for the actual movement of material from point A to point B. Because if you think about this logically, if a manufacturer in China is not going to make a printed circuit board assembly any slower than a manufacturer in Carlsbad, but the manufacturer in Carlsbad can be to my facility in a half an hour, whereas the manufacturer in Shanghai, you either have to pay a ton of money to have it air freighted over, which will still get to you in 2 or 3 days, or you're going to go on the slow boat, and that slow boat takes about 8 or 9 weeks. So you have to plan on that extra lead time when you're doing things by ocean freight. So if you're gonna do air freight, you're going to pay a lot of money for that, and your cost savings by going overseas is going to be negatively impacted, and it might even cost you more money. So that's why logistics management is so important, because it's a huge portion of the cost of that end product that you're paying for. Okay, the last two methods of logistics management are pipelines. This is mainly used for oil, gas, and other chemical products. And then multimodal is without question the most common that's out there. This combines the shipping methods. It's very common, especially for international shipments, and it's aided by standard containers. So those containers will go, many times they'll go on a truck, to a train, to a boat, to a truck, to a warehouse, and then it'll go to its final destination, probably in another kind of truck. So multimodal shipment is absolutely used all over the place, and it's aided by those standard containers. So whether it's shipping, mostly overseas, it's going to go boat and then truck, and it might also go by railroad as well. Okay, so we have now gone over some of the opportunities and the issues in managing the supply chain. We've gone over some of the things that people in supply chain do to help bring value to their organization through reducing costs, supplier negotiations, inventory management, quality control. These are all things that effective supply chain managers do in their career for their organizations, and why it's so impactful to the organization. So supply chain is key to your organizations, and managing it is key to your organizational success.